Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. My grandparents left me a beautiful farm as an inheritance, but it was in a state of disrepair when I first inherited it. I immediately started making plans to renovate and improve the property, so my husband and I could move in and make it our home. However, the dream of restoring this beautiful property was quickly shattered when I discovered that the next-door neighbor's cows were repeatedly trespassing and causing extensive damage to my property. Initially, I tried to approach the neighbors and ask them to keep their cows away, but things quickly took a turn for the worse when they became aggressive and confrontational. It turned out that the property next door was leased to a company that used it to raise and breed cattle. The company was reluctant to take any responsibility for the damages, and the neighbors were unwilling to cooperate. To make matters worse, the century-old barbed wire fence separating our properties was in a state of disrepair, and I couldn't afford to replace it. As a result, the cows continued to cause more and more damage to my property, trampling over gardens, destroying rose bushes, and leaving large piles of manure everywhere. One day, I found my dad's dog dead in a ditch, covered in cow feces. It was a heartbreaking sight, and I knew I had to take drastic action to protect my property and my family. After doing some research, I discovered that the laws in my state required livestock owners to ensure that their animals did not cause any damage to neighboring properties. Armed with this knowledge, I contacted animal control, hoping they could help me resolve the situation. When the officer arrived at my property, he saw firsthand the damage that the cows had caused, and he agreed to take them away. I was relieved that the cows were not going to be euthanized, and the company was held responsible for the damages. However, my relief was short-lived when the company fought back and refused to pay for the damages they caused. They denied any wrongdoing and claimed that the cows had never trespassed onto my property. It was a frustrating and exhausting legal battle, but I was determined to fight for justice. I hired a lawyer and prepared to go to court. The court battle was long and grueling, but we eventually emerged victorious. The company was found guilty of negligence, and they were forced to pay for all the damages they caused. They also had to compensate me for the emotional trauma that their aggressive behavior had caused me and my family. But the fight didn't end there. The company was angry at the outcome of the court case and began retaliating against me in various ways. They spread false rumors about me and my family, and they even tried to sabotage my property by trespassing onto my land and causing further damage. It was a stressful and dangerous time, and I feared for my safety and the safety of my family. In the end, I was able to get a restraining order against the company and their employees. They were ordered to stay away from my property and not to engage in any further harassment or retaliation. I also received compensation for the additional damages they caused. As I sit on my porch looking out at the newly repaired gardens and the brand new fence, I feel a sense of relief and pride. It was a long and difficult journey, but I fought for what was rightfully mine and won. The farm is now a peaceful and serene place once again, and I know my grandparents would be proud of me. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Many years ago, my now ex-wife and I decided to upgrade from the small single-story home we were in and find something with more space for us to spread out. We had her late-teen son living with us, our 3 Rottweilers, and I needed a dedicated study for my work. I'm in technology and often worked from home. After months of searching, we found our dream home, a beautiful 2-story, 4-bedroom plus study with huge amounts of space everywhere. Seriously huge. The laundry was bigger than my bedroom growing up. The quality of everything was amazing. Square-set walls, no cornices, polished Tassie oak flooring, floor-to-ceiling windows in the living areas, and 2 walls comprising commercial-grade bistro doors that opened up an entire corner of the house onto the covered outdoor entertaining area. The standard of the build was no surprise. This was a display home up until it landed on the market. We were to be the first people to live in it. I'm going to gloss over months of details and pain, but we had problems with the place from day 2, literally. On night 2, the plumbing under the ensuite shower gave out and leaked through the kitchen ceiling underneath it. A couple of weeks later, during a monster storm, 3 of the light fixtures upstairs started leaking water. A month later, we noticed rust starting to show through the rendering on the corners of the house. There were heaps of smallish, easy-to-fix problems. But the kicker was that the balcony adjoining the master bedroom at the front of the house actually started to sag down, to the point that it was unsafe to go out there due to the risk of collapse. We were mostly amenable and nice through most of this. The vendor, also the builder of course, was a small business, and we had no interest in making his life any more difficult than it already was for a small business owner. But, conversely, we were pouring a lot of our hard-earned money into the mortgage, and we wanted what we paid for, but, for his own reasons, the builder just kept making it difficult to get things fixed. There was a seemingly endless list of excuses for not turning up at agreed times, a non-stop torrent of blame directed at his subcontractors, and just plain crappy behavior, like dodging our calls and not responding to our emails. Of course, we started proceedings with our state's Consumer Affairs Department. After all, we were entitled to a statutory 7-year warranty on a new home. But that process takes time throughout which we were forced to endure issues like water leaks, a dangerous balcony we couldn't use, and a whole host of other issues that meant we weren't enjoying our home. There shouldn't have been any dispute about his responsibility to fix these problems. He just chose to be a dick about it and make us go through the government process, presumably thinking we would give up before he was forced to do anything. At around the same time, we started getting the occasional knock at the door, only to open it and find a couple standing there with a brochure in their hands, and our house pictured on the front. The first few of these conversations ended with us politely explaining that this was no longer a display house, it was our home. Without exception, they all apologized profusely and went away. After a month or so of this, I started to wonder, how was it that people still thought our house was a display home? I went looking and discovered that the builder's website still had our address listed for display. Despite repeated calls and emails, they steadfastly refused to remove our address from their website. This irritated the crap out of me. These people would often come knocking on weekends because that's when people go house shopping, right? But our pleas for the builder to update his site simply fell on deaf ears. Enough was enough. An idea had formed. Did I mention I was in technology? The first thing I did was scrape their website and set about the task of creating my own version of it, using their exact look and feel. I highlighted every single problem we'd found with the place. Every glamour shot was replaced with shots of the exact same feature, but showing the problems we had. Rust showing through the rendering, water leaking from the light fixtures, close-ups of the sagging balcony, etc. You get the idea. By the time I was done, I had what I felt was the perfect alternate version of their site, one that highlighted every single defect in the home, as well as calling out all the problems we had in dealing with the builder. I even included testimonials that were simply copies of the bullcrap emails and texts we received from the builder, avoiding his responsibilities and making lame excuses for not fixing our problems. The headline testimonial was the one where he responded with, "So just don't go out onto the balcony," when I pointed out the clear safety risk it represented. After getting a lawyer friend to check through each page to make sure I wasn't opening myself up to some form of legal action, he helped me change a few sections, chuckling the whole time. I put the site up for hosting on some cheap and cheerful hosting provider Google told me about, offshore of course. I also registered a close but not close enough to be sued domain name to reach it. The next step was to create some actual collateral for execution of my plan. After all, there was no point going to all this effort unless I was actually able to direct people to the builder's website. So I took a copy of the brochure for our house, that the builder had conveniently left a few of behind in one of the kitchen drawers, and set about creating my version of it. Similar principles as the website, no contact information except the website address. My website address. By this time, I'd made good friends with a few of my neighbors, and we'd taken to sharing a beer or two most nights on our front lawns. And wouldn't you know it, one of them was a manager for a local print shop. Given he already knew what hell we'd been through with the builder, he took very little convincing to print off a run of my brochure for me, on beautiful paper stock, nice and glossy, professional. I think it cost me half a dozen beers. Then came the final step in my plan. I waited. I waited for eager couples to turn up on my doorstep, eyes wide open in wonder at the beauty of the home they were going to pay the builder for their very own copy of. For the next 6 months or so, whenever one of these couples would turn up and knock on my door and explain their purpose, I'd let them know that this model home was selling so quickly that the builder had asked if I could hand out his updated brochure so potential buyers could go online and look up whatever the current display home address was. I don't know how many brochures I handed out. Of the 100 my neighbor printed for me, I probably only had 2 or 3 dozen left. But I know I also handed a bunch out to mates so they could have a laugh. I'd estimate close to 40 prospective buyers got a copy of my brochure. And I reckon at least 20 of those came back to thank me for warning them. A few of them had already signed conditional contracts and managed to get out of them one way or another. I don't know what happened to that builder in the end. I split up with the missus not too long after, and she sold the place not too long after that. At the time of writing this, the builder's website is gone. The domain still appears to be registered in the company's name, and their state business registration still appears to be active. As best I can tell, he's no longer at the last known address for the company, and I can't find any mention of the company online that isn't at least 6 years old. Hopefully, the ducker is out of business now, and hopefully the few dozen people I helped sidestep the pain of dealing with him were the beginning of the end of his crappy little enterprise. If you stayed this long, thanks for reading. Cheers. The next one is a petty revenge story. My friend Stan has worked at the Valuation Office of Assessments for his local council for the past 35 years. He's got a lot of stories, but this is my favorite. For context, the Valuation Office of Assessments is responsible for evaluating which council tax band a property should be in. The higher the band, the more council tax you pay. For those outside the UK, council tax is used to fund civic services such as schools, rubbish collection, and emergency services, etc. Which band you get depends on lots of different factors, but generally speaking, the more a property is worth, the higher the band is likely to be. Changes to a property that significantly increase its value, such as getting pools or extensions built, can sometimes mean a property has to be reassessed to see if it needs to go up a band. There was a woman, let's call her Mildred, who would regularly call Stan's office to report her neighbors for everything. Mildred was a typical nosy neighbor curtain twitcher who made it her life's mission to know everyone's business. Her hobby was reporting her neighbors to the police, HMRC, UK equivalent of the IRS, immigration, and of course the Valuation Office of Assessments. To give you an idea of just how awful this woman was, here are a few stories various neighbors told Stan and his colleagues. One neighbor got reported to HMRC because he came home with a fancy new car. Therefore, he must be evading tax. It was a 5-year-old Mondeo he'd just bought secondhand. Another neighbor was reported because Mildred didn't think their child looked sick enough to be off school, so she reported them for truancy. The child had recently had an emergency appendectomy, and they were at home recovering as per their doctor's orders. Everyone in Stan's department hated this woman. Not only did she add to their already heavy workload, but she was also rude, entitled, and generally unpleasant to talk to. She often exaggerated her reports to ensure somebody would be sent to inspect the property. Worse still, her reports often caused her neighbors to call and shout at Stan and his colleagues, understandably so. But what they hated most of all was that they were obligated to follow up on any report she made, and she never got in trouble for giving false or exaggerated reports. They knew she was just a mean old lady and they didn't want to enable her behavior, but policy was policy. Well, one day Stan drew the short straw and took a call from the dreaded Mildred. My neighbors at number 61 added a new bedroom to their house, and they got a new kitchen in with an extension, and he put up a new shed. I bet they haven't reported it, Mildred whined. I demand somebody reevaluate them immediately. If I have to pay my taxes, so do they. Stan begrudgingly sent a letter out to the neighbor at number 61, let's call him Bob, feeling very sorry for him. A few days later, Bob called, clearly fed up. Bob explained that he had checked with the office before getting the work done, and he had been told that the work was not significant enough to be reported, so he didn't report it. There was a note on Bob's account confirming this. Throughout the whole conversation, Bob was friendly and nice. He knew Stan had a job to do. When the inspector attended Bob's property, Mildred stared gleefully from behind her curtains. However, the joke was on her because the inspector uncovered that Bob's house had mistakenly been put on the wrong band for over a decade. He should have been on a much lower one. This meant Bob was due a massive rebate for overpaying his council tax for years. Stan laughed his arse off when the report came to his desk. He was delighted to call Bob and give him the good news. Here's the petty part. After the two had a good chuckle about everything, Bob told Stan he would use some of the money to throw a big Duck U BBQ garden party. He would invite all his neighbors, except for Mildred. Bob mentioned he might get some banners made for the party that said Duck You Mildred, but Stan warned him that could get him in legal trouble. So instead, Bob decided the banners would say, "Thanks for the money, Mildred," instead. So Bob threw his big flashy garden party, complete with banners he got printed, while Mildred seethed from behind her curtains, knowing she was responsible for Bob's sudden windfall. Mildred continued to report her neighbors for every little thing, so I guess she didn't learn her lesson. The next one is an entitled People Story. This happened yesterday but has carried over into today. My son is learning to drive, so sometimes I finish work early and pick him up so he can drive home. Yesterday, the parking lot was fuller than usual and a minivan kept driving around looking for a spot. They finally decided to squeeze in between me and the curb, leaving barely 2 inches between my passenger side mirror. Their child comes out, and the guy starts gesturing at me because obviously there is no way anyone can get into either of our cars from the passenger sides. He rolls the window down and motions for me to do the same. The moment I do, he begins to berate me loudly and very aggressively, saying I should move from my spot so his kid can get into his car. Keep in mind, I'm in a parking spot in a small car, and he is in this big minivan squeezed into this non-space. I just rolled my window back up and ignored him. Then I felt a thump and looked in my rearview mirror to see him walking back to his car. It legit felt like someone ran into me lightly. I didn't dare get out as I'm already a bit intimidated, and the guy is obviously a bully after screaming at me to move for the past 5 minutes through a closed window. The guy pulls ahead, his kid gets in, and they leave. I get out of my car and go around to the back and see a massive crack in the bumper of my brand new car, right in the center of what looks like a boot print. This is my first new car ever, barely a month into my 2-year lease, and this happens. Get a quote. Nearly $4,000 to fix the bumper as it needs to be replaced. It was kicked so hard it actually broke some clips that held it on too, and the dealership recommended it be replaced as it was very loose. Unfortunately, as a leased car, this has to be fixed ASAP according to my contract. I go back to the school in the hopes I can get some identifying info on the guy to file a report and recoup the cost through their insurance. We can clearly see the front of the van, but not the back where the license plate is because of where he is parked, ironically blocked from view by my car. Fast forward to today. I get to work and my boss calls me into her office. There was a complaint made yesterday about how rude I was and that I was most likely driving under the influence. My boss is awesome. She knows full well there's no way I would do any of that, so she just gives me a heads up and that's it. It's almost 10 a.m. and I just answered a call. It was him. He asked if disciplinary action has been taken yet. I interconnected my line to my boss, so I had a witness, and the convo was interesting. He had no idea it was me, and I was asking for details from the encounter. He gives them, not realizing I filed a police report the day before that wasn't likely to go anywhere as I had no license plate number or name. So, I just got an email. The guy's name, address, make, model year of vehicle, and license plate number. I just got off the phone with the police. I don't think he'll be happy to see them on his doorstep. Maybe he should have just been happy with vandalism instead of also trying to get me fired. Entitled people suck. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.